Hey, so tonight we're going to talk about what hygiene was like in colonial America, and trust me, by the time we're done, you're going to be so grateful for that hot shower you took today, that soft toilet paper in your bathroom, and especially that toothbrush sitting by your sink. We're talking about a time when people thought bathing was dangerous, when your underwear was supposed to absorb your body's impurities, and when the phrase, "don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," was literally good advice because the water was so dirty by the time it was the baby's turn. Oh, and if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. Super curious where you're all listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Always blows my mind how people are falling asleep to this all over the world. Alright, find that cozy spot, take a nice slow breath, and just let your body sink into whatever you're lying on. We're heading back to the 1600s and 1700s, and trust me, you're going to be real grateful for that mattress by the time we're done. So congratulations, you just woke up in colonial America. It's dawn, maybe around 1650, and you're lying on a straw-filled mattress that's seen better days. The first thing that hits you, and I mean really hits you, is the smell. It's like someone took every funky gym sock you've ever owned, mixed it with a barnyard, added some rotting food, and then sealed it all in a room with no ventilation. That's just Tuesday morning in colonial times. You stretch and immediately regret it. Something's crawling on your arm, then your leg. Actually, scratch that. Things are crawling everywhere. Welcome to your new reality, where sharing your bed with fleas, lice and bedbugs isn't just common, it's basically inevitable. Captain John Smith, the guy who helped found Jamestown, wrote constantly about the bugs in his detailed journals. He complained about troublesome ants and noisy bugs like mosquitoes and flies, and something he called the cacarooch, which the Spanish had named after some Indian bug that was apparently nasty enough to warrant its own special title. George Washington himself dealt with this stuff. In 1748, when he was just 16, he stayed at a bug-infested cabin in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley and complained that his blanket was absolutely full of lice and fleas. The experience was so gross, it taught him to prefer sleeping outside by campfires for the rest of his life. And this is George Washington we're talking about, the guy who'd eventually lead a revolution. Even he couldn't handle the colonial bug situation. You roll out of bed, your feet hitting the cold wooden floor. No slippers, because those are a luxury most people can't afford. The first order of business is emptying your chamber pot, that ceramic bowl you used as a toilet during the night. Yeah, you have to deal with that now. In colonial times, most houses had outhouses, basically covered holes in the ground, but during the night or bad weather, everyone used chamber pots. Here's where it gets interesting, in a really gross way. You don't flush this thing down some convenient drain. Nope, you walk over to the window and just dump it out. Seriously. People regularly threw their human waste right out their windows, usually into the street or yard below. If you lived near a water source, which most rural folks did, that waste would eventually find its way into streams, rivers, and wells. The same water people were drinking. You might be thinking, surely they knew this was a bad idea, but remember, this was way before anyone understood germs or bacteria. They had no clue that the nasty stomach problems, dysentery and typhoid fever that regularly swept through communities were connected to their waste disposal methods. To them, it was just the most convenient way to handle the situation. Walking outside, you notice your neighbour doing the same thing, emptying their chamber pot out the window. Mrs. Henderson across the way gives you a wave as she tosses the contents of her family's pot into the street. The smell hits you like a wall. This is normal life. This is what everyone expects. But then you see something that stops you in your tracks. Down by the river, there's a group of Native Americans, Wampanoag maybe, if you're in New England, and they're doing something that looks almost magical to your colonial eyes. They're bathing, actually washing their entire bodies in the clean, flowing water, using bundles of leaves like washcloths, scrubbing themselves all over. One of them notices you staring and waves you over. This is Tisquantum. You might know him as Squanto, a Patuxet man who survived a plague that wiped out most of his people. He's learned English and has been trying, mostly unsuccessfully, to convince the European settlers to adopt some basic hygiene practices. You should wash, he tells you, gesturing toward the river. Water cleans the body, prevents sickness. You look down at yourself, your clothes are stiff with sweat, dirt, and who knows what else. You honestly can't remember the last time you washed anything more than your face and hands. The idea of getting completely naked and submerging yourself in water seems dangerous? Unhealthy? Your Puritan neighbours certainly think so. See, the Europeans who came to America brought some pretty weird ideas about bathing with them. Most people believed that stripping your skin of its natural oils would make you vulnerable to disease. Water was considered potentially harmful to the body. Even King Louis XIII of France, the richest, most powerful man in Europe, only took 3 baths in his entire life, and 2 of those were on doctor's orders for headaches. Squanto shakes his head at your hesitation. He's seen this reaction from colonists before. To the Native Americans, the Europeans smell absolutely terrible. They can't understand why people would choose to live in such filth when clean water is right there. They're particularly grossed out by the European habit of carrying around handkerchiefs to blow their noses into, then keeping those germ-filled cloths in their pockets all day. Your people get sick often, Squanto observes, and he's not wrong. Disease runs rampant through colonial settlements. What he doesn't say, but you're starting to realise, is that the Native Americans stay much healthier than the colonists. They bathe regularly, they understand the importance of clean water, and they don't live surrounded by their own waste. You watch them finish their morning wash, their skin clean and their long black hair gleaming in the sunlight. They dress in fresh clothes and head back to their village, which you now notice smells significantly better than your own settlement. Walking back to your house, you pass other colonists starting their day. John Miller is outside feeding his chickens, and the smell coming off him could knock over a horse. Sarah Thompson is hanging laundry on the line, the same dress she's worn for 3 weeks straight, and you can smell her from 20 feet away. But here's the thing, nobody seems bothered by it. When everyone stinks, nobody really notices. Your morning routine is about to begin, and it's nothing like what you're used to in the 21st century. First, you pour some water from a pitcher into a small basin. This water came from the well, the same well that's probably contaminated by everyone's chamber pot dumping, but you don't know that. You splash some on your face and hands, rub them together briefly and call it good. That's your daily wash. No soap. Soap exists, but it's harsh stuff made from lye, ash and animal fat, and it's primarily used for washing clothes and dishes. The idea of using it on your skin seems extreme. Plus, making soap is a disgusting, time-consuming process that involves boiling animal fat for hours, and the smell alone would make you gag. You might rinse your mouth with water, but brushing your teeth? That's not really a thing. Most people just deal with toothaches when they come, usually by chewing on chamomile or figs. If a tooth really needs to come out, you'd go to the local blacksmith or barber. There are no dentists. They'd pull it out with whatever tools they had handy, maybe put it right back in the socket, or possibly give you some wooden replacement teeth if you were lucky. Getting dressed means putting on the same clothes you wore yesterday and the day before that, and probably for the past week or two. Laundry is such an enormous back-breaking chore that most people only do it when absolutely necessary. You'd have to haul water, heat it over a fire, scrub everything by hand with that harsh lye soap, and then hang it all up to dry. Only the most essential items, like underwear or baby clothes, get washed regularly. Speaking of underwear, you pull on your long linen undergarments. These are actually the key to colonial cleanliness. See, colonists believed that your underwear absorbed your body's impurities, kind of like a sponge soaking up all the gross stuff your skin produced. The idea was that as long as you changed your underwear somewhat regularly, maybe once a week if you were really fastidious, your body would stay clean. And here's the weird part. People made sure their underwear showed. The collar and cuffs of your white linen undershirt would peek out from your outer clothes, basically announcing to the world that you were wearing clean underwear and were therefore a respectable, clean person. It was like a status symbol. The whiter and crisper your visible underwear, the more civilized and moral you appeared. This obsession with clean underwear came from religious beliefs, especially among the Puritans. They saw a direct connection between spiritual health and physical cleanliness. Clean body, clean soul, clean conscience. But they had a very specific definition of clean that didn't involve much actual washing with water. As you head outside to start your day's work, you notice that the sun is fully up now and the smell is getting worse. It's going to be a hot day, which means everyone's body odour will intensify. The animals in the nearby pasture are adding their own contributions to the aromatic symphony. And somewhere nearby, someone's cooking breakfast over a wood fire, adding smoke to the already complex mixture of scents in the air. You walk past the communal well where several women are drawing water for their daily needs. They're chatting and laughing, completely used to the smell surrounding them. Little kids are running around barefoot in the dirt that's mixed with animal waste, human waste, rotting food scraps, and whatever else has been thrown into the streets. But you know what? Everyone seems fine with it. They're living their lives, raising their families, building a new world in America. They don't know about bacteria or viruses. They don't understand why diseases spread so quickly through their communities. They're just doing the best they can with what they know. A Christian missionary named George Henry Loskiel wrote about troublesome plagues that affected both humans and animals. He described something the Native Americans called living ashes, insects whose bites were as painful as being burned by red-hot ash. Just another day in colonial paradise. The thing is, life feels precarious here in a way that's hard to imagine today. Every minor injury could become infected. Every bout of stomach sickness could turn deadly. Every winter is a test of survival. And yet, as you watch your neighbours going about their morning routines, there's something admirable about their determination to build something lasting in this harsh new world. You can feel your own body settling into the rhythm of this place. Your shoulders are already adapting to the weight of the water buckets you'll need to carry. Your hands are getting used to the rough textures of everything you touch. Your nose is slowly adjusting to scents that would have knocked you over an hour ago. As the morning progresses, you realise that survival here isn't just about finding food and shelter. It's about accepting a completely different relationship with your own body, with cleanliness, with the basic functions of daily life. It's about understanding that what we consider gross or unsanitary was simply normal life for millions of people who were just as intelligent, just as caring, just as human as we are today. The The sun is getting higher, and your workday is about to begin in earnest. You take one more look back toward the river where you saw the Native Americans bathing, and you can't help but wonder, maybe they're onto something. Your first task of the day involves mucking out the pig pen, and let me tell you, after spending the night in your own unwashed colonial body, surrounded by chamber pot fumes, you thought you'd experience the worst smells possible. You were wrong. The pigs have been wallowing in mud, mixed with their own waste, rotting food scraps, and what appears to be several weeks' worth of garbage that's been tossed in their direction. But here's the weird thing. Your colonial neighbours actually consider this entertainment. Watching someone chase an escaped pig through the muddy streets is basically the 1600s version of reality TV. Kids gather around laughing as poor Thomas Baker slips and slides through the muck trying to corner his prize sow who's decided to make a break for freedom. You wade into the pen, your boots, if you're lucky enough to own boots, immediately sinking into the thick, wet mess. The smell is so intense it's practically visible, rising up in waves that make your eyes water. You're scooping pig waste with a wooden shovel that's seen better days, and every scoop sends little droplets flying. Some land on your clothes, some land on your face. In the 21st century, this would be the moment you'd run inside for a hot shower and fresh clothes. But in colonial America, you just wipe your face with your sleeve and keep working. Maybe you'll splash some water on your hands later, if you remember. The pigs themselves don't seem bothered by their living conditions. They're actually pretty happy, grunting contentedly as they root around in the filth, and you realise that this is kind of a metaphor for colonial life in general. Everyone and everything just accepts a level of dirt and smell that would horrify modern people. As you work, you notice Mrs. Williams next door preparing breakfast for her family. She's standing over a large iron pot hanging in her fireplace, stirring what looks like porridge. The pot itself is black with soot and grease, and you can't remember the last time you saw anyone actually clean one of these cooking vessels. They just get wiped out with a rag and used again. She's cooking with the same hands she used to empty her chamber pot this morning. No hand washing in between, because why would there be? The concept of germs won't be discovered for another 200 years. To her, visible dirt is the only dirt that matters, and her hands look clean enough. Breakfast in most colonial homes is pretty simple. Porridge made from cornmeal or oats, maybe some bread if the family is doing well, and beer. Yeah, beer for breakfast, even for kids. It's actually safer than the water most of the time, since the brewing process kills off some of the nasty stuff that's contaminating the wells. You finish with the pigs and head over to help with the morning milking. The cow, Bessie, is a sweet animal, but she's also standing in a field that serves as both pasture and open-air bathroom for every animal in the neighbourhood. Her udders are caked with mud, manure and whatever else she's been lying in. In your time, milk would be pasteurised, processed and thoroughly cleaned before anyone drank it. Here you just milk her directly into a wooden bucket, maybe strain out the biggest chunks of debris and call it good. The milk is warm and foamy, and it tastes like it came from a cow who's been rolling around in a barnyard all week. As you're milking, young Molly Walsh comes by. She's about 17, and she's got a story that perfectly captures the desperation of colonial life. Just last month, she spilled some milk while milking her employer's cow back in England. Spilled milk. That's it. But in 1683, England, if you're a servant and you spill your master's milk, you can be accused of theft and exiled to America as an indentured servant. Molly's lucky, in a way. She gets to work off her debt in America instead of facing worse punishment back home. But now she's stuck here for years, working in conditions that make her old job look luxurious. And like everyone else, she's adapting to colonial hygiene standards, which is to say she's basically given up on the concept of being clean. You help her carry the milk buckets back to the house, and she tells you about the ship voyage over, 2 months crammed into the dark, airless hold of a sailing ship with dozens of other people, one chamber pot between them all, no way to wash, no way to change clothes. By the time they reached America, the smell below deck was so bad that sailors refused to go down there. Made this place smell like roses, she laughs, gesturing around at the barnyard, and she's not entirely wrong. Compared to the ship, even colonial America's questionable hygiene seems manageable. Inside the house, you meet the family you'll be working with today. There's Mr. Thompson, who's wearing the same leather apron he's worn for months without washing. It's stiff with sweat, grease, and whatever else he's been working with. His wife Elizabeth is nursing their baby while stirring the porridge with her free hand, and their 3 older kids are sitting around the table in clothes that are literally falling apart. But here's what's fascinating. Despite the dirt, despite the smells, despite living in conditions that would horrify a modern health inspector, this family has something that many people lack: genuine warmth and community. They share their meagre breakfast with you without hesitation. They make room at their table. They treat you like family, even though you just met. Mr. Thompson tells you about his plans for the day. He's a carpenter, and he's working on building a new house for the minister. It's skilled work that requires precision and knowledge, but he'll be doing it while wearing clothes that haven't been washed in weeks, with hands that won't see soap all day, using tools that are caked with old wood stains and metal shavings. Of course, the minister's house will have one of them newfangled bathing rooms, Thompson mentions. Heard tell he's got one of them big wooden tubs shipped over from England. This is a big deal. Having an actual bathtub in colonial America is like owning a Ferrari today. It's a serious status symbol, but even people who own tubs rarely use them for bathing. Lord Dunmore, the royal governor of Virginia, had a beautiful bathhouse built at his mansion, but he only used it to cool off on hot days. Servants would pour cool water over him while he sat there, but it wasn't about getting clean. It was about temperature control. If someone wealthy did decide to take a bath, it was a major production. You'd need servants to haul buckets and buckets of water from the well. You'd need to heat it over the fire, which required a lot of precious firewood. You'd need to fill the tub, which might take an hour or more. And then, to make it worth all that effort, the whole family would use the same water. Father goes first, obviously, then the sons, in order of age, then mother and the daughters. By the time the baby gets a turn, the water is so murky and contaminated that you literally couldn't see the bottom of the tub, hence the saying, "Don't throw the baby out with the bath water." It was a real warning because the baby could actually disappear in all that murky water. Most families who even attempt this level of bathing might do it 3 or 4 times a year. In New England, where winters are brutal, some people only manage a full-body wash once per year. The idea of daily bathing wouldn't catch on for another century or more. After breakfast, you join Thompson for his carpentry work. The minister's house is taking shape nicely, but the work site itself is pretty much what you'd expect. Sawdust mixed with mud, tools lying around in the dirt, workers who haven't washed their hands since last week handling the wood that will become someone's home. Thompson introduces you to the other workers. There's Jake the apprentice, a kid about 15 who's covered in wood shavings and what looks like several days' worth of meals down his shirt front. There's old Pete, who's been doing carpentry for 40 years and probably hasn't had a bath since he started. And there's Samuel, who's got a fascinating solution to colonial hygiene problems. Samuel is wearing a powdered wig. Now, powdered wigs weren't just fashion statements, they were actually a practical response to the lice problem that plagued colonial America. See, lice love human hair. They lay their eggs in it, they feed on your scalp, and once you've got them, they're incredibly hard to get rid of. The solution? shave off all your hair and wear a wig instead. Wigs could be removed and professionally cleaned. Once a week, if you could afford it, you'd take your wig to a specialist who would boil it to kill the lice, then powder it with fragrances like sassafras, bergamot and bay leaves that were supposed to repel insects. The whole process cost a fortune, but it was still easier than dealing with lice in your natural hair. Both men and women wore wigs, and they kept their own hair cropped super short. Samuel lifts his wig slightly to show you his scalp, completely bald, shaved smooth as a baby's bottom. It looks weird to modern eyes, but it actually makes a lot of sense when you're living in an environment where parasites are just part of life. The funny thing is, the pomade they used to style the wigs actually attracted insects, so you'd spend all this money to have your wig deloused, then put stuff in it that drew bugs right back. The whole system was kind of self-defeating, but it was still better than having lice living directly on your scalp. Of course, not everyone can afford proper wig maintenance, Samuel explains, scratching at his scalp. Some folks just let the bugs move right into the wig. Cheaper that way, but you can hear them crawling around in there during church service. The image of sitting in a quiet colonial church, listening to the pastor preach while everyone's wigs are literally buzzing with insects, is both hilarious and deeply unsettling. As the morning progresses, you notice more evidence of colonial America's complicated relationship with cleanliness. The wealthy merchants' wives who walk by are clearly trying to project an image of refinement and cleanliness. Their outer garments are made of fine fabric. Their visible underwear is crisp and white, and they carry themselves with an air of superiority. But you catch a whiff as they pass, and underneath all that finery, they smell just as funky as everyone else. Maybe worse, actually, because the heavy fabrics and multiple layers of clothing trap odours in ways that simpler working clothes don't. One of these ladies, Mrs. Harrison, stops to inspect the minister's house progress. She's wearing a beautiful dress with a full skirt that's so wide she can barely fit through doorways. The dress is held out by a series of hoops underneath, and she's clearly proud of how fashionable she looks. But Thompson whispers to you that hoop skirts like that make it basically impossible for women to sit down comfortably. They have to perch on the edge of chairs, and using the outhouse becomes a major engineering challenge. Plus, all that fabric is never washed. It's far too delicate and expensive, so Mrs. Harrison is essentially wearing a beautiful, fashionable trap for every smell and stain she encounters. The class differences in colonial hygiene are fascinating. Poor people like Thompson's family might be dirty, but their simple clothes can at least be washed occasionally. Rich people wear elaborate outfits that cost more than most families make in a year, but those outfits can never be properly cleaned. They just layer on perfumes and powders to mask the inevitable smells. Mrs. Harrison pulls out a delicate lace handkerchief to dab at her nose. This is another status symbol. Having a fancy handkerchief shows you can afford delicate fabrics, but she's also using it to blow her nose, then tucking it back into her dress where it will sit all day, getting grosser and more germ-filled with each use. The Native Americans find this European habit particularly disgusting. They can't understand why anyone would want to carry around their own mucus in a piece of cloth. To them, it makes about as much sense as carrying around a bag of garbage as a fashion accessory. After Mrs. Harrison moves on, Thompson and the other workers share a few jokes about the wealthy folks and their strange ways. There's definitely some resentment about the class differences, but also a kind of amused tolerance. Everyone's just trying to survive in this harsh new world, whether they're doing it in fancy clothes or plain ones. As midday approaches, the heat is building and everyone's natural body odours are intensifying. You've been working hard all morning and your colonial clothes are now thoroughly soaked with sweat. In your time, this would be the moment you'd change into fresh clothes and maybe take a quick shower. But in colonial America, you just keep working. Everyone around you is in the same condition, so nobody thinks twice about it. The smell of collective human body odour mixes with sawdust, animal waste, cooking fires, and the general mustiness of life in a world without modern sanitation. Lunch is served right there at the work site. Bread, cheese and beer, eaten with the same unwashed hands you've been using to handle dirty tools all morning. The bread has a few wood shavings stuck to it, but you just brush them off and keep eating. The cheese has probably been aging in someone's root cellar for months, developing flavours that would make a modern food safety inspector faint. But you know what? It tastes pretty good. When you're hungry and you've been doing physical labour all morning, simple food hits the spot, and there's something satisfying about sharing a meal with people who are working hard to build something lasting, even if they're doing it under conditions that would horrify modern health standards. As you eat, old Pete tells stories about the early days of the settlement, when things were even rougher than they are now. Used to be, we didn't even have proper outhouses, he remembers. Just found a tree and hoped for the best. Least now we got them covered holes in the ground. It's a reminder that even by colonial standards, things are slowly improving. Progress is measured not by how clean people are, but by how organised their waste disposal systems become. It's a very different way of thinking about civilization and advancement. The afternoon work session is about to begin, and you realise your body is already adapting to this new normal. Your nose is getting used to the smells, your skin is accepting the layer of dirt and sawdust that's accumulating, your hands are toughening up from handling rough tools and materials. You're becoming a colonial person with all the physical discomforts and social adaptations that entails. And surprisingly, it doesn't feel as awful as you expected. It feels like life. Just a very different kind of life than the one you're used to. The afternoon brings a new challenge, helping with laundry day at the Thompson house. Now, if you think colonial people didn't wash their clothes often, wait until you see what's actually involved in washing them. Elizabeth Thompson has been putting this off for weeks, but little baby Thomas has gone through all his clean diapers, and her husband's work shirts are getting so stiff with dried sweat they could probably stand up on their own. First, you help haul water from the well. Lots and lots of water. Each bucket weighs about 25 pounds when full, and you need at least 20 buckets to do a proper wash. That's 500 pounds of water that has to be carried by hand from the well to the house. Your back starts aching just thinking about it. Then comes the fire. Elizabeth has been saving wood for weeks because laundry day requires keeping a fire going for hours to heat all that water. The big iron cauldron hanging over the fire pit can hold maybe 5 gallons, which means you're heating water in batches, over and over, while the dirty clothes pile keeps staring at you like an accusation. Elizabeth pulls out her precious bar of lye soap and the smell hits you immediately. This isn't the pleasant lavender or vanilla scented stuff you're used to. This is soap made from wood ash lye mixed with animal fat, usually pig fat or beef tallow, and it smells exactly like you'd expect something made from ash and old fat to smell. Made this batch last month, Elizabeth says proudly, holding up the greyish-brown bar. Good strong soap burns your hands something fierce, but it gets the dirt out. She's not kidding about burning your hands. Lye soap is so caustic it can literally eat through skin if you're not careful. Most colonial women have permanently damaged hands from doing laundry with this stuff. Raw, cracked skin that never fully heals because they're constantly exposing it to harsh chemicals. But here's the thing that really gets you. Even with all this effort, even with the caustic soap that burns your skin off, the clothes don't actually get clean by modern standards. The water you're using is already contaminated. The soap is harsh but not particularly effective at removing oils and deep-set stains. And the whole process happens out in the barnyard where dust, dirt and animal hair are constantly blowing around. Elizabeth starts with the baby's diapers, which have been soaking in a wooden tub for 3 days. 3 days. The smell rising from that tub could knock a buzzard off a garbage truck. She fishes them out with a long wooden stick, drops them in the boiling water, and starts stirring them around like she's making the world's worst soup. Diapers go first, she explains, because they need the strongest soap and the hottest water. Then come her husband's work shirts, then the children's clothes, then her own dress, and finally anything that's not heavily soiled. You help her scrub each item on a washboard, a wooden board with metal ridges that tear at the fabric almost as much as they remove the dirt. Your knuckles get scraped raw within minutes. Elizabeth's hands are moving with practiced efficiency, but you can see years of damage in her cracked, scarred skin. The whole process takes most of the afternoon. By the time you're hanging the last shirt on the line to dry, you're both exhausted, soaked, and your hands feel like they've been through a cheese grater. And this is for just one family's essential clothing. The stuff that absolutely had to be washed. Course, won't do this again for another month, maybe 2, Elizabeth says, surveying the wet clothes flapping in the breeze. Too much work, too much soap, too much firewood. As the clothes dry, they're collecting dust, pollen, and probably a few insects that will be permanently pressed into the fabric. But by colonial standards, this laundry is now clean and will have to last for weeks before the next washing. While you're hanging clothes, Dr. Whitman arrives to check on young Mary Thompson, who's been complaining of a toothache for days. Dr. Whitman isn't really a doctor in the modern sense. He's more like the local barber, surgeon, apothecary, dentist, all rolled into one. His medical training consists of apprenticing with another barber surgeon and maybe reading a few books if he was lucky. Mary is about 12 years old and she's holding her jaw with tears streaming down her face. The tooth that's bothering her is black and obviously infected, and you can smell the decay from several feet away. Dr. Whitman examines her mouth with his unwashed hands, poking at the tooth with a metal tool that's seen better days. "Tooth's got to come out," he announces. "No saving it now." There's no Novocaine, no sterile instruments, no proper dental surgery. Dr. Whitman pulls out a pair of pliers that look like they came from a blacksmith's shop, has 2 men hold Mary down, and just yanks the tooth out. The sound is awful, a wet cracking noise followed by Mary's screams. Blood is everywhere. Dr. Whitman stuffs a piece of cloth in Mary's mouth to stop the bleeding and tells her to bite down hard. The cloth isn't clean, the pliers weren't sterilised, and his hands were covered with dirt and who knows what else. By modern standards, he's basically guaranteed that Mary will get a serious infection. But this is considered normal medical care in colonial America. Dr. Whitman wipes his bloody pliers on his apron and puts them back in his bag, ready for the next patient. He recommends that Mary rinse her mouth with salt water and avoid chewing on that side for a few days. Before he leaves, Dr. Whitman shows you his other dental tools. There's a silver ear picker that doubles as a toothpick, dating back to the 1600s. One end has a small scoop for removing earwax, and the other end is pointed for picking teeth and cleaning under fingernails. It's a multi-purpose tool that gets used for all sorts of hygiene tasks without being cleaned in between. Earwax is valuable stuff, Dr. Whitman explains. Better than beeswax for treating thread, keeps it from unravelling when you're sewing. So colonial people aren't just dealing with their own earwax, they're harvesting it for practical purposes. Dr. Whitman also shows you a set of wooden dentures he made for old Mr. Peterson. They're carved from oak, fitted with metal wires, and they look about as comfortable as you'd expect wooden teeth to feel. Of course, some folks prefer teeth from poor people who've sold them. He mentions casually. Fresh human teeth work better than wood, but they cost more. Wait, what? People are selling their teeth? You ask him to explain. Oh sure, poor folks sell their healthy teeth to rich folks who need replacements. Good money in it, if you can stand the pain. He describes a thriving market where desperate people will have their good teeth extracted and sold to wealthy colonists who need dental work. The extracted teeth are then implanted into the rich person's mouth or used to make custom dentures. George Washington himself has got teeth from poor folks mixed with animal teeth and metal work, Dr. Whitman says with professional pride. Of course, they hurt him something terrible and make his face look all swollen, but they're better than having no teeth at all. The idea of George Washington, the future father of the country, walking around with other people's teeth painfully jammed into his mouth gives you a whole new perspective on colonial life. Even the most powerful, successful people are dealing with levels of physical discomfort that would be unthinkable today. After Dr. Whitman leaves, you help Mrs. Thompson prepare dinner while poor Mary recovers from her tooth extraction. The kitchen is a fascinating study in colonial food hygiene, which is to say there basically isn't any. The cooking pot hasn't been properly cleaned in months. Mrs. Thompson just scrapes out the worst of the old food and adds fresh ingredients on top. The wooden spoons are black with accumulated grease and food residue. The cutting board has deep grooves where countless meals have been prepared, and those grooves are filled with old food particles that have never been properly cleaned out. Keeping a pot seasoned is important, Mrs. Thompson explains, stirring the stew with a spoon that's seen better decades. Clean it too much and the food starts sticking. The vegetables she's adding to the pot came from the garden this morning, and they're covered with dirt, manure, which is used as fertilizer, and probably a few insects. She rinses them briefly in a bucket of water, but the water itself isn't exactly clean, and she's using the same cloth to wipe everything that she used to clean up after Mary's tooth extraction. As evening approaches, you notice that the Thompson children have started their own version of hygiene routines. Young Johnny, who's about 8, has discovered that earwax makes excellent hair grease. He's harvesting it from his ears and using it to slick his hair back, which was apparently a common practice among colonial children. His sister Susan, about 10, is picking lice out of her hair and eating them. When she sees your shocked expression, she explains matter-of-factly, "They're crunchy and they taste nutty. Plus, Mama says it's the only way to really get rid of them." The baby, little Thomas, is wearing a diaper that's basically just a cloth wrapped around his bottom. When it gets soiled, Mrs. Thompson will rinse it out and use it again immediately. There are no disposable diapers, no modern washing machines, no baby wipes. Just cloth that gets reused over and over until it literally falls apart. As the family settles in for the evening meal, you realise that you've witnessed a complete day in the life of Colonial Hygiene, and it's both worse and more understandable than you expected. These people aren't dirty because they're lazy or ignorant. They're dealing with practical limitations that make modern cleanliness impossible. Water has to be hauled by hand. Soap is expensive and harsh. Firewood is precious. Clothes are handmade and irreplaceable. Medical care is primitive and dangerous. Every single thing that we take for granted about staying clean requires enormous effort and resources that most colonial families simply don't have. But they've also developed systems and beliefs that help them cope with these limitations. They've redefined cleanliness to focus on what's achievable. They've created social norms that make their situation acceptable. They've found ways to maintain dignity and community, even while living in conditions that would horrify modern health inspectors. As you sit down to dinner with the Thompson family, sharing their simple meal of stew and bread, you're struck by the warmth and generosity of people who have so little but are willing to share it freely. Their hands are dirty, their clothes are stained, their breath could knock a horse over, but their hearts are genuinely kind. Little Mary, still recovering from her tooth extraction, smiles at you with a mouthful of blood, missing tooth and probably several cavities, and somehow her smile is still beautiful. Johnny shows you a wooden toy he carved himself, and his pride in his craftsmanship shines through despite the layer of dirt covering his hands. Mrs. Thompson insists you have seconds of the stew, even though feeding an extra person stretches their limited resources. Mr. Thompson tells jokes and stories that have the whole family laughing, creating warmth and joy in their humble, aromatic home. You realise that cleanliness, as important as it seems to modern people, is actually just one small part of human happiness and community. These colonial families have found ways to create love, laughter, creativity and connection, despite living in conditions that would challenge anyone. As the sun sets and the family prepares for bed, you understand that you've experienced something profound, a glimpse into how adaptable and resilient human beings can be when they're forced to redefine normal. These people are living full, meaningful lives according to completely different standards than yours, and in many ways, they're just as successful at creating happiness as anyone in the modern world. Tomorrow will bring more of the same: hard work, questionable hygiene, physical discomfort, and genuine human connection. And somehow that combination has worked well enough to build the foundation of a nation that would eventually become the most powerful in the world. As darkness settles over the Thompson household, you help prepare for what passes as bedtime hygiene in colonial America. Mrs. Thompson brings out the family's warming pan, a circular metal container with holes in the lid that gets filled with hot coals and slid between the bedsheets to warm them up before anyone climbs in. The process is actually pretty dangerous. You have to move the warming pan rapidly back and forth to avoid burning holes in the sheets, and more than one colonial family has accidentally set their bed on fire trying to stay warm. But when your bedroom has no heat source and the temperature outside is dropping below freezing, a little fire risk seems worth it. Keep it moving, Mr. Thompson instructs as you slide the coal-filled pan between the rough woolen blankets. The metal is so hot you can feel it through the thick cloth wrapping the handle. One pause too long and you'll have charred bedding instead of warm bedding. The sleeping arrangements reveal another layer of colonial hygiene challenges. The entire Thompson family, parents, 4 children, and now you, will be sleeping in basically 2 rooms. Privacy is a luxury that poor families can't afford, which means everyone is intimately familiar with everyone else's bodily functions, smells, and nighttime habits. Young Mary, still recovering from her tooth extraction, is spitting blood into a bowl beside the bed. Johnny has developed a nasty cough that sounds like he's hacking up half his lungs. Baby Thomas needs his diaper changed, but since there's only one spare diaper and it won't be dry until morning, Mrs. Thompson just wraps him in some old rags that smell like they've been used for this purpose before. But the real eye-opener comes when you learn about the colonial approach to disease management. As you're settling in for the night, Mrs. Thompson mentions casually that the Henderson family, just 2 houses down, has been dealing with what sounds like dysentery for the past week. Little Emma Henderson died yesterday, she says matter-of-factly, while tucking in her children. 3rd child they've lost this year to the bloody flux. The bloody flux, dysentery, is one of the major killers in colonial America, and it spreads like wildfire through communities with poor sanitation. People don't understand that it's caused by contaminated water and food, the same contaminated water they're drinking, and the same unsanitary food preparation methods you witnessed all day. Should we be worried about catching it, you ask, thinking about modern quarantine procedures? Mrs. Thompson shrugs. God's will. If he wants to take us, he'll take us. Ain't much we can do about it either way. This fatalistic attitude toward disease is typical of colonial thinking. Without understanding germs or contagion, people attribute illness to divine punishment, bad air, or moral failings. The idea that their hygiene practices might actually be spreading disease doesn't occur to them. But some people are starting to make connections. George Washington, for instance, figured out pretty quickly that dirty military camps were death traps. During the Revolutionary War, he issued strict orders about cleanliness to his officers, though getting the soldiers to actually follow them was another matter entirely. Washington's men were supposed to wash their hands and faces once a day and change their shirts once a week. For 18th century military standards, this was practically obsessive. Most armies of the time considered it normal to lose more soldiers to disease than to enemy action. But even Washington's relatively enlightened hygiene orders were nearly impossible to enforce. His soldiers came from the same colonial background as the Thompson family. They weren't used to regular washing, and they saw no point in it. One witness recorded that the troops were not used to doing things of this sort, and would sooner let their clothes rot on their backs than wash them for themselves. This is where the followers came in, an essential but often overlooked part of colonial military life. These were men, women and children who travelled with the army, cooking meals, washing clothes and cleaning up after the soldiers. Without these followers, Washington's army would have been even more of a health disaster than it already was. The followers were often family members of soldiers, but they also included entrepreneurs who saw an opportunity to make money providing services the army needed. They'd set up temporary laundries, cook meals for hire, and even provide medical care when the official army doctors were overwhelmed. One follower, a woman named Sarah, tells you about life with Washington's army during the brutal winter at Valley Forge. Men were dying faster than we could bury them, she remembers. Not from British bullets, mind you, but from camp fever, dysentery and lung sickness. All could have been prevented with proper cleaning, but try telling that to a soldier who's been wearing the same shirt for 3 months. It's estimated that 2/3 of Washington's troops at Valley Forge died from disease, not combat. Typhoid fever, influenza and dysentery swept through the camps like wildfire. The irony is that the British Army in the South was also being decimated by disease. So in some twisted way, the lack of hygiene on both sides evened out the playing field. Sarah describes the daily battle just to maintain basic sanitation in a military camp. You'd designate areas for the soldiers to relieve themselves, but they'd just go wherever was convenient. You'd try to keep the cooking areas clean, but with hundreds of men tramping through with muddy boots, it was hopeless. You'd wash their clothes, but they'd put them right back on dirty bodies, so what was the point? The seasonal challenges made everything worse. In winter, water would freeze, making washing nearly impossible. Soldiers would huddle together for warmth, sharing body heat, but also sharing every illness. In summer, the heat would intensify body odours and accelerate the spoilage of food, creating perfect conditions for dysentery and other stomach ailments. Spring brought its own hygiene challenges as snowmelt created muddy conditions that turned camps into fetid swamps. Fall meant preparing for winter by storing food and supplies, often in conditions that would horrify modern health inspectors. Back in civilian life, seasonal hygiene patterns followed similar cycles. Winter was particularly brutal for colonial families. Charles Francis Adams, grandson of President John Quincy Adams, wrote about New England winters where the temperature of a bedroom ranges below the freezing point. There is no inducement to waste any unnecessary time in washing. This led to the legendary stories about springtime baths that revealed underwear that had been worn continuously through the entire winter. Families would literally discover clothing that had been forgotten under multiple layers of winter garments. The phrase spring cleaning took on a whole new meaning when applied to colonial bodies and clothing. Religious beliefs complicated colonial attitudes toward hygiene in fascinating ways. The Puritans saw cleanliness as directly connected to moral purity, but their definition of cleanliness focused more on spiritual matters than physical ones. They believed that water could purify both body and soul, but they also worried that public bathing could lead to sexual impropriety. This created a strange contradiction where private washing was seen as morally beneficial, but communal bathing was considered sinful. Bathhouses existed in some colonial towns, but they were primarily for wealthy men to socialize and conduct business, not for actual cleaning. Dr. Thomas Ewell of Virginia had some particularly interesting theories about women and hygiene. He believed that women deliberately made themselves smell bad as a defense mechanism against overly amorous men. According to his logic, women used poor hygiene as a way to protect their virtue by making themselves less attractive to potential attackers. A woman who renders herself as disgusting as possible ensures her own protection, Dr. Ewell wrote, apparently with a straight face. You can only imagine how popular he was with his female patients. Thomas Jefferson, despite being one of the most enlightened men of his era, had his own problematic views on women's hygiene. He once told his own daughter, "Nothing is so disgusting to our sex as a want of cleanliness and delicacy in yours. Thanks for the pep talk, Dad." These attitudes reveal how hygiene in colonial America was never just about cleanliness. It was tied up with ideas about morality, social class, gender roles, and religious beliefs. Poor hygiene could be seen as evidence of laziness, sinfulness, or moral corruption. Good hygiene could be a sign of virtue, prosperity, and spiritual purity. As you lie in the Thompson family's bed, listening to the various snores, coughs, and bodily functions of your sleeping companions, you start to understand how disease spreads so rapidly through colonial communities. In this single room, you've got 6 people sharing air, sharing bedding, and basically sharing every germ and microbe their bodies are harbouring. The baby's dirty diaper is creating a cloud of bacteria right next to where the whole family sleeps. Mary's infected tooth socket is probably breeding all sorts of nasty organisms. Johnny's cough is sending droplets of who knows what into the air with every hack. and none of them have washed their hands since morning. But perhaps most striking is how normal this all feels to them. They're not lying awake worrying about germs or infections. They're not disgusted by the smells or concerned about the hygiene conditions. They're just a family settling in for the night, finding comfort in each other's presence despite the less than ideal circumstances. Mrs. Thompson hums a quiet lullaby as she rocks the baby to sleep. Mr. Thompson tells a gentle story about a fox and a rabbit that has the children giggling despite their various ailments. Even Mary, with her bloody mouth and obvious pain, manages to smile at her father's silly voices. There's something deeply moving about watching people create joy and connection under such challenging conditions. They've found ways to prioritise what matters most: family, love, community, even when basic physical comfort is hard to come by. As the night deepens and the family finally settles into sleep, you realise that you've witnessed something remarkable. These people are living through conditions that would challenge anyone, yet they're maintaining their humanity, their humour, and their capacity for love. They're building families, raising children, and creating communities that will eventually grow into something extraordinary. The hygiene problems that seem so overwhelming to modern eyes are just one aspect of a much larger story about human resilience and adaptation. Yes, colonial America was dirty, smelly, and disease-ridden, but it was also the birthplace of ideas about freedom, democracy, and human dignity that would eventually change the world. Outside the window, you can hear the sounds of other families settling in for the night, babies crying, mothers singing, fathers coughing, children laughing. It's the sound of a community adapting to harsh conditions with whatever resources they can muster. And somehow, despite everything you've witnessed today, despite all the gross and shocking aspects of colonial hygiene, you find yourself feeling oddly optimistic about human nature. If people can maintain their essential goodness under these conditions, if they can still find ways to care for each other and build meaningful lives, then maybe there's hope for humanity under any circumstances. The warmth from the coal-filled warming pan is starting to fade, but the warmth from being welcomed into this family's life will stay with you long after you've returned to your own time with its hot showers, flush toilets, and antibacterial soap. You drift into an uneasy sleep surrounded by the symphony of colonial nighttime sounds. Not just the snoring and coughing you'd expect, but also the constant rustling of bedding as family members scratch at flea bites, the occasional thud of someone getting up to use the chamber pot, and the perpetual scurrying of mice in the walls who are just as much residents of this house as the humans. Sometime in the middle of the night, you're awakened by a different sound entirely, retching from the next room. Mr. Thompson's elderly father, who lives with the family, has come down with what sounds like the same bloody flux that's been moving through the community. You hear Mrs. Thompson getting up to help him, her bare feet padding across the cold wooden floor. "Fetch some clean rags," she whispers to her husband, "and check if we've got any of that bark tea left." This is how disease spreads in colonial America, not through dramatic, obvious routes, but through these quiet, middle-of-the-night moments when someone gets sick and everyone in the household rushes to help without any understanding of contagion. The same hands that clean up after a sick person will prepare breakfast in the morning. The same rags used to wipe contaminated surfaces will be rinsed out and used for other household tasks. By morning, you can already see the inevitable progression. Mrs. Thompson looks pale and queasy. Little Johnny is complaining that his stomach hurts. The infection that started with the Henderson family 2 houses down is now making its way through the Thompson household. And from here, it will probably spread to their neighbours, then their neighbours' neighbours, until half the settlement is sick. But life goes on because it has to. Mr. Thompson still needs to finish the minister's house. The animals still need to be fed. The daily work of survival doesn't pause for illness. It just becomes harder and more dangerous when you're doing it while sick. As the family begins their morning routine, you notice details you missed yesterday. The wooden bucket they use for drinking water has a green film around the rim that suggests it hasn't been properly cleaned in weeks. The dried herbs hanging from the ceiling are covered with dust and probably insects. The family cat, which helps control the mice, has been using a corner of the kitchen as its personal bathroom. Yet somehow, most of the time, people don't get sick. The human immune system is remarkably adaptable, and colonial Americans developed resistance to many of the pathogens in their environment simply through constant exposure. Children who survived their first few years of life often became quite hardy, having been exposed to everything their environment could throw at them. Dr. Whitman stops by to check on Mary's tooth extraction, and his presence gives you insight into colonial medical theories about hygiene and disease. Like most medical practitioners of his era, he believes in the miasma theory, the idea that disease spreads through bad air rather than through direct contact with contaminated materials. Keep the windows open, he advises Mrs. Thompson. Let the bad air escape and fresh air come in. This advice actually isn't terrible, since better ventilation does help reduce disease transmission, but his reasoning is completely wrong. Dr. Whitman also believes in the importance of bodily humours, the idea that illness comes from imbalances in the body's natural fluids. According to his medical training, too much washing could disrupt these humours and actually cause disease rather than prevent it. A person's natural oils protect against illness, he explains, examining Mary's healing tooth socket with unwashed hands. Strip them away too often and you leave the body vulnerable to corruption. This medical theory provided convenient justification for colonial America's hygiene practices, but it also prevented people from adopting the kind of cleanliness that might actually have helped them stay healthy. As Dr. Whitman packs up his instruments, he shows you something fascinating from his medical bag. A collection of artifacts from an old tavern that was recently excavated. Archaeologists in 2014 found a dozen brick-lined privy shafts behind what had been an illegal tavern in colonial Philadelphia, and the contents revealed surprising insights into colonial hygiene practices. Found all sorts of things down in those privy holes, Dr. Whitman explains, pulling out examples of what the archaeologists discovered. Bottles, bowls, drinking glasses, even wig curlers and pottery made by local artisans. This archaeological evidence reveals that colonial privies, outhouses, served as more than just toilets. They were also garbage dumps, storage areas, and apparently hiding places for valuable items. People would toss broken pottery, empty bottles, and worn-out tools down the privy holes, creating time capsules that modern archaeologists find fascinating. The tanning supplies found in the privy shafts remind you of another aspect of colonial hygiene that you haven't fully appreciated: the relationship between personal cleanliness and various trades and crafts. Tanners, who processed animal hides into leather, worked with materials so foul-smelling that they were often forced to live on the outskirts of towns. The process involved soaking animal skins in solutions of urine, animal brains, and rotting vegetable matter for weeks at a time. Blacksmiths worked over forge fires that left them covered in soot and metal shavings. Butchers spent their days elbow-deep in animal blood and entrails. Farmers dealt with manure as a regular part of their work. Most colonial trades involved getting dirty in ways that would be shocking by modern standards. And since there was no practical way to get truly clean afterward, people just accepted that work meant being dirty. But even within this generally grubby context, some individuals stood out for their attention to personal hygiene. John Hancock, one of the founding fathers, was apparently obsessive about cleanliness by colonial standards. He had servants set up his bath every single day and even used cologne after washing, practices that his contemporaries considered eccentric and possibly unhealthy. George Washington was another exception. Despite his awful dentures and that unfortunate experience with the lice-infested cabin, Washington maintained what passed for good hygiene in colonial America. He changed his clothes regularly, washed his hands and face daily, and even experimented with different tooth-cleaning methods. Alexander Hamilton took cleanliness so seriously that he would change his underwear multiple times a day during hot weather. His colleagues thought this was borderline obsessive, but Hamilton believed that fresh undergarments were essential for maintaining a gentleman's reputation and health. These exceptions prove that some colonial Americans understood the connection between cleanliness and health, even if the broader culture hadn't embraced that idea yet. They also highlight how hygiene practices often reflected social class. Wealthy people like Hancock and Hamilton could afford servants, multiple sets of clothing, and imported soaps that made better hygiene possible. As you spend your final morning in colonial America, you witness the community's response to the spreading illness. Rather than implementing any kind of quarantine or sanitation measures, people rely on prayer, herbal remedies, and fatalistic acceptance. The minister announces that Sunday service will include special prayers for the sick, and families begin preparing traditional remedies passed down through generations. Mrs. Thompson brews a tea from willow bark, which actually contains compounds similar to modern aspirin, so it's not entirely useless. Mrs. Henderson prepares poultices from various herbs that may or may not have antibacterial properties. Old Pete the carpenter swears by a tonic made from fermented fruit and various mysterious ingredients that probably does more harm than good. But the most striking aspect of the community's response is how people continue to care for each other despite the risks. Neighbours bring food to sick families, women take turns caring for each other's children, men help with essential tasks when the head of a household is too ill to work. This mutual support system is one of the most admirable aspects of colonial life. Without modern medical care, without insurance or government safety nets, communities had to take care of their own members. People understood that helping others during illness wasn't just morally right. It was essential for everyone's survival. As your time in colonial America draws to a close, you find yourself thinking about the enormous changes that would occur over the next century. The colonial period you've experienced represents a turning point in human attitudes toward cleanliness and health, though the people living through it couldn't know that. By the 1880s, Louis Pasteur would discover the connection between microbes and disease transmission, revolutionizing medical understanding. The Industrial Revolution would bring mass production of soap, indoor plumbing, and affordable bathing facilities. Public health movements would emerge, promoting hand washing and sanitation as civic duties, but all of that is still in the future. The people you've lived among are making do with the knowledge and resources they have, creating communities and raising families under conditions that require enormous courage and resilience. As you prepare to return to your own time, you take one last walk through the settlement. The smells that shocked you initially, unwashed bodies, animal waste, rotting food, smoke from cooking fires, have become familiar background elements. Your nose has adapted, just as your colonial neighbour's noses adapted long ago. You pass the well where people are drawing contaminated water for drinking and cooking, unaware that this same water is making them sick. You see children playing in streets that double as open sewers, their laughter ringing out despite the unsanitary conditions. You watch women hanging laundry that will be dirty again within hours, continuing the endless cycle of colonial housework. At the river, you see Squanto and several other Native Americans taking their morning bath, still maintaining the hygiene practices that served their people well for thousands of years before Europeans arrived. They wave as you pass, perhaps still hoping that the colonists will eventually learn from their example. The contrast between Native American and European hygiene practices serves as a reminder that cleanliness standards are cultural constructs, not natural laws. The Native Americans developed sophisticated systems for staying clean and healthy in the same environment where Europeans struggled with basic sanitation. Different approaches, different results. Standing at the edge of the settlement, looking back at the community you've briefly called home, you're struck by both the harshness and the warmth of colonial life. Yes, the hygiene conditions were appalling by modern standards. Yes, people lived with levels of discomfort and health risks that would be unacceptable today, but they also created something remarkable. Communities based on mutual support, hard work, and shared values that would eventually grow into the foundation of a new nation. The colonial Americans you've lived among aren't heroes or villains. They're ordinary people dealing with extraordinary challenges using the knowledge and resources available to them. They're doing their best to build decent lives for themselves and their families while navigating conditions that tested human endurance and ingenuity. As you take your final breath of colonial air, thick with the scents of unwashed humanity, farm animals, and wood smoke, you realize that this experience has changed your perspective on both the past and the present. The hot showers, flush toilets, antibacterial soap, and modern medicine that you normally take for granted now seem like miraculous luxuries. But more importantly, you've gained appreciation for the human capacity to adapt, to find joy and meaning even under difficult circumstances, and to create communities that nurture the best aspects of human nature despite external challenges. The colonial Americans were building more than houses and farms. They were building the social and cultural foundations for a society that would eventually develop the resources and knowledge to solve many of the problems they faced. Their struggles with hygiene and disease would eventually motivate the scientific discoveries and technological innovations that make modern cleanliness possible. In a way, every hot shower you take, every time you wash your hands with soap, every visit to a modern dentist honours the memory of people like the Thompson family who lived and worked and loved under much harder conditions. They did the difficult work of establishing communities in a harsh environment, and their descendants inherited the fruits of that labour. As you drift back to your own time, you carry with you a deeper understanding of human resilience and the gradual nature of progress. The journey from colonial chamber pots to modern plumbing wasn't just about technological advancement. It was about countless individuals making small improvements, learning from their mistakes and passing hard-won knowledge to the next generation. So tonight, as you settle into your clean sheets in your heated bedroom with your freshly brushed teeth and your shower-clean skin, remember the Thompson family and their neighbours. Remember their courage in facing uncertainty, their kindness towards strangers, and their determination to build something better for their children. Remember that the comfort and cleanliness you enjoy came at a price paid by previous generations who lived with fleas and lice, who hauled water by hand, who made soap from ash and animal fat, and who buried too many children lost to diseases that are now easily prevented. And remember that human beings are capable of creating beauty, love, and meaning under almost any circumstances, even when they haven't had a proper bath in months.